thank you again for inviting me. My name is Punya Mishra. I'm Associate Dean and Professor at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. Um, and I want to just thank all of you at Kathmandu University School of Education for inviting me. I visited Nepal when I was in 9th grade, back when I was a student in India. And I have wonderful memories of my visit to Kathmandu. And I wish that we were not in this COVID situation and we could actually do this face to face, because that would be a lot of fun and delightful to do that. I am also a huge fan of cricket. And one of the players I really admire is Sandeep Lamishane, who I know is a spin bowler from Nepal. And didn't get to see much of him this IPL. I follow IPL very consistently. So I'm hoping that he'll get a chance in the last game, because I know he plays for Delhi Capitals. So that's Sandeep over there. I'm, like I said, a huge fan of cricket and enjoy watching him and other players. So I'm going to talk about creativity, technology, and design for learning in STEM and beyond. And I want to start with an example of which we take very much for granted. It's something that we see in many textbooks, and it is this. This is the periodic table of elements. We have seen this in textbooks. We have seen this everywhere. And if you look at this row here, technically it should actually fit in between. The table should look something like this. And the reason why we make the table like this and not like this is because we need to fit it within the pages of a printed book. So that's really interesting to me, that technology constrains how we represent ideas in science. So, this is what a textbook thing looks like, because we are trying to compress a lot of information in there. What is interesting, though, is chemists have created hundreds of different representations of the periodic table. So here are some. Let me give you this idea. So if you think about this, the key idea of the periodic table is this idea of periodicity, which is that patterns repeat over and over again. But the table, the way it is shown here, does not capture that really well, and students do not understand that. So here is one way of thinking about it, where you can show in 3 dimensions how patterns change over the rows of the periodic table. But that's not all. We have so many different representations. For instance, here is one. How many of you have seen this representation of a periodic table? And that's an accurate representation. Chemists have created it. I didn't make that up. Here's another one. Another one. There are ones which are in 3 dimensions, and so on. And the thing for us to understand here, the reason I start my talk with this is because it's clear that chemists and scientists are showing amazing amounts of creativity in thinking about the relationship between the different elements in a periodic table. And what is clear is that we do not give our students the same opportunities. What do we tell our students? We tell our students, this is the truth. This is the way the periodic table is. This is the relationship between elements. And we said, this is the only way you can learn and understand it. And I think that is really important as we think about STEM, as we think about STEAM, as we think about all of this, that we understand that the field of science, the field of engineering, the field of science, technology, mathematics is incredibly rich and complex. For instance, in our textbooks, we give one kind of proof of the Pythagorean theorem. Maybe we give 2. There is a whole book devoted to over 500 different proofs of the Pythagorean theorem. And I think it's really important that we recognize that and we understand that. On top of that, we have to also understand that technology plays a significant role in how we represent our ideas and how we convey our knowledge to students. The example that I gave of the periodic table, which removes the lanthanide and actinide series, is because we wanted to fit it within the technology of print. But in an online world, you have websites like this one, which allow you to explore the periodic table in multiple and different ways. You can look at it up on your phone, you can look at it up on apps. It's a really powerful way now of thinking about the relationship between elements. So the first thing I would like us to think about is what are ways in which chemists and scientists work with technology that we are losing out because we are thinking in a very unidimensional way. So a lot of my work over the, as Binod just said, has been around this idea of technology and learning and what is it that teachers need to know to intelligently integrate technology in their teaching. And this led to the work which we call the TPAC Framework. And I would be unfair and it would not be right of me if I did not acknowledge my colleague, Matt Kaler. Matt is still at Michigan State University, though I'm now at Arizona State. I came here 4 years ago. But this work that we did is a genuine collaboration where Matt and I worked together, and I cannot claim credit for the TPAC framework 100% because it is really the work that both of us did together. And the question is, what is the TPAC framework? And I think this is really important as we think about teaching and learning with technology. And essentially what the TPAC framework argues is that whenever we are in an educational context, we are interacting around three different things. So we are looking at the content that we have to teach, and that might be mathematics, that might be science, that might be art, physics, music, whatever, geography, social studies. And then we have certain approaches to teach it, pedagogical approaches, which may be small group discussion, large lectures, interactive video, whatever it may be, game-based learning, whatever it may be. And that those two come together with some kind of technology which supports that teaching and learning. And that the technology needs to be selected in an intelligent way so that pedagogy and content can work together. So if you want to teach students about creativity and about experimentation and playing with ideas, you cannot go with a recorded video. A recorded video will not allow students to be able to engage in the ways that we want to engage. And the TPAC framework has had a significant impact on research and practice. I do not say this to boast, but there have been over 1,000 articles and almost 300 book chapters and books. And what is more impressive to me, 400 dissertations that use this framework in trying to understand this process of teaching and learning. But much more important for me is that the TPAC framework has become a foundation for professional development and teacher education across the world. And I am hopeful that in your university and in your department that you're thinking of this, because I think this is an important framework to factor in. And as we think about technology in education, it becomes clearer to me that the role of technology is greater even today. As Binod, as you said in the beginning, because of the COVID-19, schools have closed down. All of you guys are trying to teach now remotely. So the COVID-19 has been a really transformative sort of thing for not just Nepal, not just the United States, globally. In mid-February 2020, just China and Mongolia had their schools closed down due to COVID. By mid-March 2020, almost the entire globe had shut its schools down. Just think about that for a second, that in 2 months, 194 countries, 1.6 billion learners were out of school. In fact, if you look at the numbers from UNESCO even today, over 500 million kids are still out of school today, 7, 8, 9 months after this crisis hit us. And so what that tells us that we live in a world which is incredibly volatile because things can change rapidly. It is one which is uncertain, where it's not clear what the next step would be, what the future would be. It's clearly incredibly complex, right? And it is also ambiguous. It is not clear what our next steps, what we can do to fix things and so on. And people have often called this the VUCA world, which means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we also understand that we live in this hyper-connected and interdependent world. Like, just think about what we are doing right now. I am sitting here in Phoenix, Arizona, with my jacket, which I have not worn in 8 months because I don't have to go to the office anymore. But I thought I should wear a jacket because I'm here representing myself and the university, right? And we are here together in some way. And it's interdependent because we understand that a virus that started in China is affecting all of us today. And as educators, our responsibility to our students still continues. And hyper-connected and interdependent in other ways too. So this is an image of a little stone tablet with markings. That was the amount of information that you could hold in your hand 2,000 years ago. And you think about the next image, which is the amount of information that you can hold in your hand because of this device, right? And the penetration of cell phones and mobile devices are an amazing opportunity for us as we think about this idea of remote learning and technology. When this pandemic first began, my friend Young Zhao and I, with Young Zhao is in Kansas, I'm here in Arizona State, Chris Dede in Harvard, Kurt Bonk in Indiana, we started this thing called Silver Lining for Learning. And every Saturday, and I would encourage you guys to log in and check that out, we meet educators from across the world. And we look at how educators are dealing with this crisis. In fact, just this last Saturday, we met with, it was an exciting episode, 2 Saturdays ago actually, an exciting episode where we met a bunch of students from Nepal who, I think I'm going to get this name wrong, but Baman Gimre brought together. It was super exciting to talk to these students and see how they have been using MOOCs to enhance their own learning. They started by learning, language and English. And what was amazing was we heard from students, this young lady who got interested in astronomy because of that, and paleontology, another one who got interested in history and writing. So we live in this amazing place where these opportunities exist to make these kinds of connections happen. And what this does is it prepares us for the future. And as we think about what it means to prepare for the future, I want to give a few minutes to talk about some work that I've done around this sort of idea of 21st century learning. And this framework that we have presented about what 21st century learning can and should be. And this connects really well with the work that you're doing around STEM and STEAM, because what we argue that 21st century learning has to focus on 3 key concepts. The first is foundational knowledge. There is no getting around that. You need to, if you want to be a good mathematician, you need to know mathematics. If you need to be a good physicist, you need to know your physics. Absolutely, no doubt about that. But also what we call meta knowledge, the ability to be creative, the ability to collaborate and work together with each other. That's as important a skill that we need to develop. And finally is what we call humanistic knowledge. These are the values that we bring to the task. As we know, science is not divorced from the reality. It is not divorced from the world. Many scientific decisions that are taken have significant implications. We all, I mean, Nepal and India, where I'm originally from, are countries which have tolerated colonialism. We understand that science and mathematics can be used against people, and that we have to factor in broader humanistic values as we think about the impact of science and technology. So for me, when we think about STEAM, this is what STEAM means. STEAM means it's not just foundational knowledge. It is learning to work together and also thinking hard about sort of the deeper values that we bring to the work that we do. And these values are going to be different from country to country because culture is different. So respecting and acknowledging these cultural differences, I think, becomes incredibly important. I'm really proud of the fact that just a month or so ago, I was part of this big project called the Future of STEM Education. Those of you who are interested, and I would appreciate somebody dropping this link on the chat, it's stem-futures.org. And this was a project that we did across the country. And we got 100+ educators like yourself who are engaged in STEM education. So we had faculty from engineering, faculty from biology, faculty from biotechnology, faculty from sustainability. And we did 3 webinars, each of those devoted to these 3 aspects of the framework. We had a webinar which focused on the importance of foundational knowledge. We had a webinar which focused on the importance of meta-knowledge. And we had another webinar which focused on the emphasis on humanistic knowledge. And what we did after those 3 webinars, we brought 100+ faculty members together to work together collaboratively over a week. And we did this all on Zoom because we are all stuck on Zoom these days. We did this all on Zoom. 1 week of design sessions to create future STEM curriculum. I really encourage you, all of you who are interested in STEAM education, STEM education, to go to stem-futures.org. Over the next few weeks, we're going to make public all the different curricula that were developed. We are still working on cleaning it up, but you can still go to the website now and you can see the webinars, you can follow the webinars, you can see all the different things that we did over those 2 weeks. There are a bunch of videos created by me and other members of the team. So I would really, Vinod, if you want to share that link with all the people who have signed up, that would be very, very helpful. So as we think about this framework, I want to focus on one aspect of it, which is this aspect of meta-knowledge. And what meta-knowledge is, so if foundational knowledge is knowledge of the disciplines, meta-knowledge is how we act on that knowledge. And the way we act on that knowledge is through creativity and collaboration, critical thinking. Those are sort of the important pieces that we bring into the place. And so since I had promised that I would talk a little bit about creativity, which has been a big part of my research as well over the years, instead of thinking about what is creativity, why is it important, how do we define it, and try to better understand where new ideas, the creative ideas, come from. So this has been some work that I've been doing over the past. So if I have to look at sort of my professional career, the TPAC work that I talked about sort of ended in around 2007, 2008, maybe up till 2010 for a little extent. Then from 2008 or so till around 2016, 17, I worked a lot in this area of creativity and teacher creativity. So one of the things is like, why is creativity important? As you think about this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we live in today, I mean, the students in your classroom, your children, are going to grow up in a world that you cannot predict. That's something we just have to accept as being a fact. The world is changing dramatically. There are professions today which did not exist when I was a student in high school or in college, or even 7 or 8 years ago. Those professions did not exist. You could be an engineer who takes care of matters on the cloud. You could be a social influencer. You could be an app designer. You could be a website programmer. None of these professions existed 5, 7, 10 years ago. And even the professions that did exist have been changed dramatically. If you are a journalist today, you are no longer somebody who writes articles and it gets published in the newspaper. You have to be prepared to do video and social media and what have you. If you are, I have a friend who's an astronomer. He has not looked through a telescope for years. What he does, he gets data from different telescopes, and then he writes programs which allow you to see how black holes develop and so on. If you're a musician today, you create music, you share music, you make your living off music online. So we live in a world which is dramatically changed, and technology and science is going to be a critical part of it. But it's not just going to be knowing how to program, how to do this. It's going to be understanding the psychology of media. It is going to be understanding the ethics of media. So as you think about your STEAM program, I want you to think about that. I want you to think not just about foundational knowledge, but also meta knowledge and humanistic knowledge. And so one of the questions we get asked very often is like, how do you define what creativity is? And so we have written a whole bunch of articles on this, and people are interested, please drop me an email. I can send you links to some of these. So creativity to us is something that's novel, which means it's something new that people haven't seen before. But just because something is novel doesn't make it creative. Because you could do something really stupid, and that's really novel, but it doesn't help. And so one of the important things is that that creative things are effective. So it's novel, it's new, it's different, but it's actually doing something important and useful. And finally, something that's novel and useful that is in one context may not work in another context. Something that works here in Phoenix, Arizona, may not work in Kathmandu, may not work in Bhubaneswar, where I'm from. So we have to think about the context within which these things work. And so this is like a really simple definition of creativity, which is a creative idea is something that is novel, effective, and whole. So that's NEW. So that's an easy acronym to remember. It's new, it's novel, effective, and whole. The question then becomes, where do these new, novel, effective, and whole ideas come from? And, one of the most creative people in our lifetime is Steve Jobs. And he said, creativity is just connecting things. And this is the idea of combinatorial creativity, which is that you take ideas from two different areas and you put them together and you get some novel combinations. Hopefully they're useful and they fit with your context, right? So he argued that. One of the my work that has focused on is this idea of transdisciplinary creativity. And again, those who are interested, please drop me an email and I can send you, or Binod, just let me know and I can maybe create a set of links that might be useful to people. Because we have a whole book that we've written around this idea of transdisciplinary creativity. And what this argues is that there are ways of thinking that cut across disciplines. So you might be an architect, you might be a scientist, you might be a poet. But what you will do essentially is these 7. And there is a 6 here, there's a 7th one that I will mention. So 1, your field allows you to perceive and see the world in different and interesting ways. So if you're a mathematician, the world around you is mathematical in nature. If you're a musician, every sound has meaning. Second is this idea of patterns. The same thing that poets do and mathematicians do is look for patterns. And using those patterns, we abstract some bigger, deeper ideas. So when you think about Newton thinking about an apple falling and thinking about the moon falling towards the earth, and that's how we figured out gravitation, that's abstraction. Another thing that we as humans do is even as I'm talking, I'm gesturing, I'm moving my hands, is like our understanding is deeply embedded in our bodies. We make models of things. That's embodied thinking. And scientists and programmers and all understand this idea of modeling, where we take these ideas and we create models of them that we can make changes and so on. And finally, speaking to creativity is this idea of playing. That's what we do. One of the important things we do, we love to play with ideas. We like to put things together. And then finally, you can bring these six together in this idea of synthesis. And so when we look across the disciplines, we see these 7 ideas play out over and over and over again. And if you're interested, I can send you a link to a couple of books that we have done. I have the PDFs for these. I can share these with you, which speak about this idea of transdisciplinary education and creativity. And it is completely relevant to STEM and STEAM. Because what it says is that across these, whatever discipline you're in, these 7 ways of thinking will always be present. And I think that's an important insight to have, because we often think of artists and poets and scientists and engineers as living in very different worlds. I think they do, but they're also, they have these shared commonalities. I'm not going to go into some of the work that I've done around aesthetics and learning. If you're interested, again, let me know. And it's important to understand. And this is, so if I had to talk about my early work around technology integration, that was the TPAC work. The work in between, which was creativity and transdisciplinary creativity, which I just talked about. I want to talk about now the work that I'm currently involved in. Because one of the challenges that I faced in the work that I did is I was working with teachers, I was working with educators, and I could see that despite the fact that the work that I did with them was like very important to them and transformational, it didn't lead to any change in the system. And that got me thinking really hard about what is it about an educational system that resists this change? And so that's where I bring out this idea of design and understanding that none of this change can happen without us thinking about design. And so thinking about education, the whole arena of education, whether it's schools, universities, private tuition institutes, whatever, that these are designed in certain ways. And that every aspect of education is designed. So when I say design, what do I mean by that? When I say design, this is a definition from Perkins. Design is structure adapted to a purpose. So if you think about our schools, our universities, our educational institutions, these are structures that we have created. We have made it up. There is nothing sacrosanct about a building and credits and hours and exams. Nothing. These are all things created by us humans. And the sad thing is, for many of us in countries like Nepal and India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka or Uganda, we are living with the legacy of a whole bunch of colonial practices that have defined what education and learning can and should be. And we have to recognize that. I'm not saying that it's all bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's all bad. But we also have to recognize that these things were imposed on us, that there are many other ways that we can think about it. And if we think about our educational system as not producing the results we want, I think it's important for us to recognize it is because it was designed that way. If our students are not being creative, it's because we did not design a system that supported their creativity. If we think our students are not entrepreneurial, it's because we designed a system that did not respect that. And so we have an opportunity, I think, this post-COVID, to really rethink some of these assumptions. I think that's really, really something that we can do. And so my recent work now has focused on thinking about the role of design in education and asking this question, what do we design when we design education? And so this is my latest work, which is this idea of the 5 spaces for design in education. And I won't take a lot of time over it, but I'll give you some idea of that. So one thing that as educators we design are artifacts. Artifacts could be, a computer app. It could be a chair. It could be a building. Those are physical, relatively stable objects. We create these objects and they determine and influence how we think about education. We also design processes. These are procedures or directions. These could be how you sign up for classes. It could be a lesson plan that you design, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
I have some issue here.
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. Okay. And then one of the most important things we design for a learner are the experiences. How they engage with the ideas that we are trying to convey. Is it going to be this like really boring thing sitting in front of a computer in this remote education situation? Is it going to be more engaging, connecting with family, going out, collecting data, doing experiments? And most importantly, these two, the kinds of systems and culture that we have created. And we cannot have significant change in education unless we rethink the broader systems and culture. And by systems, I mean grading systems, how students are accepted to universities. These are structures that we have built, which allow certain people in and don't allow certain other people in. And if we think about ourselves as a democracy, as a movement to improve the next generation, we have to think about systems and culture. And so this is the work that I've been doing around this 5 spaces of design and education. And again, a lot of this is on my website, which you can just Google and find, or just drop me an email and I can send you more resources. I think to get to the conclusion of this, I think it's important to understand that education is not a natural phenomenon. It's not like a tree or a cloud or those beautiful mountains in Nepal, which are natural things. Education is a system that we have created. And it is designed to serve our purposes and meet our needs. And when we think about, as academics, as researchers, on what our purpose should be, what our research should be about, it's not to find out how it works, but rather for creative innovation to make it work better for our students. So just like I said, last weekend, we had the students from Nepal, and I was absolutely inspired to hear from them. But what is also sad is that there is a finite number of them, right? There were like 7, 10, 15 who we could have pulled into this conversation. How can we make sure that all of our students can partake of these opportunities? I think that's the important question. And so to just sort of bring it together, I think the only hope for sustainable change in education, STEM and beyond, is to recognize its artificiality, is to recognize that these are things that we have made up, and to engage in design across these different spaces to create better futures for our children. And that's where I think this idea of transdisciplinary creativity, bringing together TPAC, bringing design and humanistic principles becomes really, really important. With that, I want to thank all of you very much. I know the Zoom thing can be difficult to navigate, but I do hope that what I said will lead to some interesting questions and discussion, and I look forward to that. Thank you very much.